When Silas Halloran was lowered into the frozen ground, his second wife did not wait for the dirt to settle. She kept the house. She kept the truck. She kept the warm beds and the coffee tin full of savings. And she handed his 16-year-old daughter one brass key, one worn duffel bag, and one flat sentence. The old workshop out back. Nothing else. Della had $11 in her coat pocket. She had a deaf old collie leaning against her leg, too tired to lift his head. And she had a stepmother watching from the kitchen window to make sure she left before dark. There is nothing in that shed but rust and your father's wasted years, the woman told her. Take it and go. The whole town of Millbrook, Wisconsin, had spent 30 years calling Silas Halloran a dreamer who never made a dime. A quiet man in a quiet barn. A tinkerer. A fool. So the 16-year-old girl dragged her bag across the frozen yard. She pushed open the door she had been locked out of since she was 12. She lifted the lantern, and what her father had been quietly building inside those walls, in the hours after the world went to sleep, for a daughter everyone said was too slow to matter, was something not one soul in that town ever expected to find. But to understand what waited in that barn, you first have to understand the girl standing at the door of it. My name is Opal Ridgway. I am 72 years old this winter, and what I am about to tell you is the true story of my granddaughter, Della Halloran, who had $11 in her pocket the night the world threw her away. I did not know that night that she had been thrown away. I did not know because I had not been permitted to know anything about that child for 6 long years. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where the cold started. Let me start with the day we buried her father. The ground in Millbrook does not soften in November. It goes hard by Halloween, and it stays hard until April, and when a man dies in November, they dig his grave with a machine because a shovel will not go through that dirt for love or money. Silas Halloran was 54 years old when his heart stopped. He was standing in his workshop. He had a spoke shave in his right hand and a curl of oak on the floor at his boot. That is where the neighbor found him, still standing, still holding the tool. The dog was pressed against his leg like it was trying to hold him up. The dog's name was Juno. Old collie, deaf as a stone, gray in the muzzle and slow in the hips, and he had followed Silas from room to room for 13 years the way a shadow follows a lantern. The neighbor said Juno would not leave the body. The neighbor said they had to carry the dog out. That was on a Sunday. The funeral was on a Tuesday, and I was there. I was standing at the back of the little cemetery on the hill above the Lutheran church in a black coat that was 2 sizes too big for me because I had lost weight the winter my daughter died, and I had never gained it back. I was standing at the back because I had not been invited to stand at the front. I was standing at the back because the woman who had married Silas after my daughter's death had made it very clear 6 years ago that I was not to come near Della Halloran ever again. Her name was Marlene. I will not pretend I have kind words for her. I have tried. God knows I have tried. But some prayers you say the same one for 6 years, and it never quite lands. So there I was, behind the last row of mourners, watching the small pale girl beside the grave from 100 feet away. She had her father's shoulders. She had her mother's mouth. And she was not crying. She was standing so still she looked carved. 16 years old. 16. I had not seen her since she was 10. I wanted to walk up to that grave. I wanted to put my arms around that child. I wanted to say her name out loud in front of God and everybody. But Marlene was 3 steps behind her, in a coat, with the tag still on the sleeve, and Marlene was watching me the whole time. Watching me the way a barn cat watches a barn door. So I did not move. I stood at the back, and I said goodbye to a good man I had loved, as my own son. And I said nothing to the granddaughter I had loved, before she was even born. And that was the first cruelty of that week. There would be others. The lawyer's office was above the hardware store on Main Street. It had a radiator that clanged every 4 minutes, and a smell of old coffee that had never quite left the carpet. The reading of the will was on Thursday. I was not invited to that either. but I have friends in Millbrook. And one of them was the lawyer's secretary. And she told me everything. Marlene sat in the middle chair, with her back very straight. Her son Corbin sat on her left, 15 years old, skinny, wearing a jacket that was clearly borrowed from a taller boy. He kept picking at the cuff of it. Della sat one chair apart from both of them, which my friend told me later was about right, because Della had never really been sitting with them, not once, not in all 4 years since Marlene had walked into that house. The lawyer was a tired man, bald on top. Reading glasses, he kept sliding down his nose. He read the small things first. The truck went to Marlene. The savings account went to Marlene. What little was in it. The house on the hill. The land the house sat on. All of it. Hers. Then he slowed down. To my daughter Della, he read. I leave the workshop building, the half-acre it stands on, and everything inside it. He paused. There is one more line here your father wanted me to read out loud. Says, she will know what to do with it. The radiator clanged. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Marlene laughed. Not a big laugh. A short one. Through her nose. My friend said it was the kind of laugh a person makes when a bill comes due for money they do not have. So she gets the junk. It is hers, the lawyer said, carefully. The building, the parcel, the contents, that is clear. Corbin looked at Della. Della looked at nothing. They drove home in 2 silences. Marlene and Corbin rode in the truck cab. Della rode in the bed of the truck. In the cold. In the November wind. Because there had not been an offer to ride up front. And she had not asked for one. The house on the hill was warm when they got there. The porch light was on. The kitchen smelled like the casserole a neighbor had brought over after the service. And Della stood in the front hall a minute, holding her coat, waiting for someone to tell her what to do. Marlene walked past her without looking. Marlene went upstairs. She stayed up there 20 minutes. And when she came back down, she was carrying something small and brass in her right hand. She set it on the kitchen table. Sit down, she said. Della sat. Marlene did not. We need to talk about the arrangement. There is no arrangement, Della said. That is correct. There isn't. Marlene pulled the chair opposite Della out from the table, but she did not sit in it. She just stood behind it, both her hands on the back of it, like the chair was between them for a reason. This house is mine now. I have my own son to think about. I cannot afford to keep a grown girl in a room she does not pay for. I am not a grown girl. I am 16. You are old enough. You are old enough to know how the world works. Della looked down at the brass thing on the table. It was the key to the padlock on the workshop door. She had watched her father carry that key on a leather cord around his neck for years. She had never seen him hand it over. Not once. Not to anyone. Marlene must have taken it off of him at the funeral home. That thought went through Della like a small cold nail. Why do you hate me? Della asked. She was not angry when she said it. She just wanted to understand. Because understanding how things fit together was the one thing Della had always been able to do. Even when the letters on a page would not hold still. Even when the teachers had given up on her. She could always look at a thing and tell you which way the grain was running. And she was looking at Marlene now, trying to read the grain of her. Something moved across Marlene's face. Something that looked, for 1/2 second, almost like fear. Then it closed up. I don't hate you. I can't afford you. There is a difference. Della almost asked what that meant. She almost said, there is a truck in the driveway. There is a coffee tin in the cupboard. There is a whole warm house standing around us. But she saw Marlene's knuckles, white on the back of that chair. And she understood, in that quiet way she understood most things, that something was wrong in that house. Something Marlene was not going to say to her out loud. Something Marlene was maybe not going to say to anyone, until it was too late for anyone to help. You have until dark, Marlene said. Then she walked to the doorway. Then she stopped. Then she said the sentence that Della would carry inside her ribs for a long time after. There is nothing in that shed but rust, and your father's wasted years. Take it and go. Then she went upstairs. The stairs creaked under her the same way they had always creaked. Della packed her life into one duffel bag. It did not take long. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a coat, a toothbrush, a sketchbook she had never let anyone see, and a photograph of a woman holding a baby, which she kept wrapped in a wool sock, so the corners would not bend. The woman in the photograph was her mother. She had been the baby. On the back of the photograph, in her father's careful print, were 3 words. No date, just the spring before Della. She had memorized that face, every line of it, because she had been 6 years old when her mother died. And 6 was old enough to remember, but not old enough to remember everything. Corbin appeared in her doorway. He stood there. He worked up to something. That is messed up, what she is doing. Della shrugged. It is her house. I could talk to her. Don't. Della looked at him. The offer was real. She could tell. He was not a cruel boy. He had never been a cruel boy. He had just been raised, since he was 10 years old, to understand that crossing his mother was easier not done. And the offer was also the kind of offer that cost the person making it exactly nothing. They both knew it. It is fine. Don't. He nodded. He looked relieved. And that relief told her everything she needed to know about where she had ever stood in that house. She went out the back door with her bag over her shoulder. And that is where she found Juno. The old collie was on the porch, on the boards, curled up small against the cold, which was wrong, because Juno always slept inside, by the wood stove. That had been the arrangement for 13 years. Della crouched down. She put her hand flat on Juno's chest, because Juno could not hear her voice anymore. That was how you talk to him now. You put your hand on him. You let him feel that you were there. The old dog lifted his head. His tail moved. Once, against the boards, Della looked up at the kitchen window. Marlene was standing there, watching. Della opened the back door. Why is the dog out here? He stinks. And the vet wants money I do not have for an animal that is mostly dead already. He is old. He is useless. She said it the same flat way she had said it about the shed. Useless. Della looked down at Juno. Juno looked up at her. I will take him. Good. And Marlene shut the window, so Della crouched again, put her hand on the dog's chest. Waited. The old dog got slowly to his feet. The 2 of them went down the porch steps together, the girl and the deaf collie, into a yard going hard with frost, under a sky that was already starting to turn the color of bruised iron. Halfway across the yard, Della turned and looked back at the house. The windows were yellow and warm. Up on the 2nd floor, she could see Corbin standing at his window, a thin shape against the light, not waving, not moving, just watching her go. Then the curtain fell across the glass, and the shape was gone. Della turned around. She kept walking. Her breath came out in white clouds. Somewhere behind her, a man she had loved her whole life was 2 days in the ground. Somewhere ahead of her, a locked building waited, that the whole town had agreed was worth nothing. $11 in her coat pocket. A deaf dog. That was the sum of everything her 16 years had come to. The workshop stood at the far edge of the property. Steep tin roof, wide double doors, and one tall window up in the loft that caught the very last of the daylight. She had grown up looking at the outside of it. Like a locked room in her own home, she set the lantern down. She worked the brass key into the padlock. Her hands were shaking. She told herself it was the cold. The lock was well oiled. It opened without a fight. The doors swung inward, and the first thing that hit her was the smell. It was not the smell of rust. It was not the smell of rot. It was not the smell of a place left to die. It was cedar. It was linseed oil. It was clean sawdust. It was the exact, perfect smell of being 6 years old on a high stool in this room, handing her father a chisel. The smell rolled out of the dark, and it went over her like a wave. She had to put her hand on the door frame. She had to stand there a minute, because her body remembered a thing her mind had been trying not to reach for. Juno walked in. Straight in, like he had been there yesterday. Della lifted the lantern. She stepped through the door, and what the light showed her made no sense, because there was no junk. There was no rust. The floor was swept clean. The tools hung on the walls in neat rows, each one in its painted outline. Each one oiled, each one bright. A long workbench ran down the center of the room, longer than a kitchen table, longer than a coffin. Above it, on a single nail, hung her father's leather apron, where it had always hung, as if he had only stepped out for a minute. And down the length of that long room, standing quiet, standing patient, stood shapes, covered in white dust sheets. A dozen of them. More. Della stood very still. She set the lantern on the bench. She walked to the nearest sheet. She took hold of one corner. She pulled. The sheet slid off. Pooled at her feet. It was a writing desk. A tall secretary desk with a drop front and a row of tiny drawers behind it. Built out of walnut, so deeply figured the grain seemed to move in the lantern light. She ran her thumb along the corner, where two boards met. She felt no seam at all, only the small, even teeth of a dovetail joint, cut so clean it looked like a machine had done it. No machine had done it. Her father's hands had done it. Della had been called slow her whole life, but even a slow girl could see. Even a slow girl could see that this was not the work of a man who had wasted anything. She went down the row. She pulled sheet after sheet. A long dining table. The top a single slab of pale wood. A dark river of grain running the length of it. The edges left a little wild, where the tree had been. For chairs. Then 6. Every spindle turned to match. A low dresser. Very old. Its veneer split and lifted. And beside it a second dresser, which had to be the same dresser after her father had gotten hold of it. The cracks gone. The wood whole again. A rocking horse with a real horsehair mane. A blanket chest of cedar. A climbing rose carved across the lid. And at the end of the row, near the cold potbelly stove, standing under a dozen wooden clamps, his glue still not dry, was a cradle. A baby's cradle. The slats bent in a gentle curve. One rocker shaped and sanded smooth. One rocker still a rough board, waiting for the spoke shave. Her father had been in the middle of making it the day his heart stopped. Della stood over it a long time. She reached out. She gave it the smallest push. And it rocked. Slow. Even. Juno came and lay down beside it on the swept floor. Della sat down on the high stool. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She just breathed, because if she cried in this room, she was not sure she would be able to stop. There was an order book on the workbench, under a jar of pencils. Della opened it. She turned the pages slowly, because pages were always slow for her. The letters slid around, but the numbers held still. The drawings held still. Names, page after page of names. Next to each name, a small, precise drawing. Next to each drawing, figures. The walnut table had the words half down, and a number that made Della sit up straight on the stool. Her father had been charging real money, serious money, written in a steady hand next to 40 different jobs. Pinned to the wall was a list. A waiting list. People were waiting, some of the dates a year out, waiting to pay her father to build them things. And on the corkboard beside it, thank you notes. Dozens. In all different handwriting. Thank you, Silas. We can never repay you. God bless you, Silas Halloran. On a spike hung a stack of work tickets. And across the bottom of more than a few of them, in her father's careful print, were 2 words. Over and over. No charge. No charge. No charge. Della sat back down. She built a fire in the potbelly stove. The stove ticked as it warmed. Heat spread out into the room. She found a roll of moving blankets. She made herself a bed on the floor near the stove. She took the photograph of her mother out of the wool sock. She propped it against the leg of the workbench. Juno circled twice. Juno lay down against her back. For the first time, since her father had died. The hard thing in her chest loosened. By a fraction, she slept better in that cold barn than she had slept in 4 years in a warm house. A car door slammed in the yard. Della sat up. Gray morning light was coming through the tall loft window. The stove was down to coals. Juno was already at the door, nose still working, tail moving slow. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She went to the door. She pulled it open a crack. It was not a truck. It was a station wagon, old, blue, with a dented back bumper. And climbing out of it, in a wool coat the color of dried moss, was a woman Della had never seen in her life. At least, not that she could remember. The woman had white hair, cut short and neat. She was carrying a Tupperware container in both hands, like it was precious. She stopped when she saw Della in the doorway. She did not smile. She did not speak. She just looked at Della the way a person looks at something they have been trying to remember for a very long time. Then she said very quietly, "Oh, sweetheart, look at you." Della did not answer, because she did not know who this woman was, because there was something in the woman's voice that had gone straight through her ribs and hit her in a place she could not name. The woman climbed the 2 low steps. She stopped an arm's length away. "You do not recognize me. That is exactly what I was afraid of." "Ma'am, I don't. My name is Opal Ridgway." The name meant nothing. Della searched her memory for it. Found nothing. Searched again. Found the smallest possible thing. Not a memory. Just a shape of a memory. A woman's hand on her hair. A voice singing, "I am your grandmother, on your mother's side. And I know you were told, and I know you probably believed it because a little girl believes what a grown woman tells her. But I am not dead, Della. I have never been dead. I have been 60 miles up the road in Rhinelander for 6 years, writing you letters that never got to you." Della's hand came off the doorframe. Della sat down, right there, on the workshop step, in the cold, because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her up. Opal set the Tupperware down. She sat down beside Della. She did not touch her. 2 people breathing white clouds into the November morning. "Marlene told me you were dead." "I know she did. She told me you did not want anything to do with me." "I know she did." "Why?" Opal was quiet a long moment. "Because your mother was my only child. And when your mother died, I was the only person left on this earth who remembered her the way she really was. And Marlene did not want a woman in your life who could tell you the truth about the mother you lost. Because if you knew the truth about your mother, you would know the truth about yourself. And Marlene needed you not to know that." Della looked at her. "What is the truth about my mother?" Opal took a slow breath. "Let me come inside. Let me sit with you a while. And I will tell you everything. I have been waiting 6 years to tell you everything." Della opened the door. She let her grandmother into the workshop. And Juno, who had not warmed to a stranger in 3 years, walked straight up to Opal Ridgway and leaned his gray head against her knee and closed his eyes, like he knew, like the old dog knew. They sat by the stove. Opal had brought coffee in a thermos. She had brought 2 apple turnovers. She poured the coffee into the lid and passed it to Della and told her to hold it with both hands. "How did you know I was here?" "Vera Prentice called me, the woman who runs the diner in town. She has been my friend for 40 years. She was at the funeral. She saw what Marlene did. She saw you standing in the back of the church like a girl who did not know where to go. And she called me last night at 10:30, and she said, 'Opal, get in the car in the morning. That child needs her people.'" Della held the coffee lid. She had not known she had people. She had thought she was alone in this. "I have people," she said quietly, testing the words. "You have people." They drank the coffee. They ate the turnovers. Opal's eyes moved from piece to piece, from the desk to the cradle to the wall of thank you notes. Her hand pressed flat over her mouth. "I begged him for years to let the town see this room. He never would. He said the work could speak for itself once it left the barn. He said a man did not need to stand next to it taking bows. You knew him, sweetheart. Your father brought me my first pot of soup the night my daughter died. He drove 60 miles in a snowstorm. He walked into my kitchen. He put a pot on my stove. He did not say 10 words the whole night. He just sat with me until I was ready to sleep. Then he drove 60 miles back. Opal put a hand on her chest. So yes, I knew him. Della was about to say something. She was not sure what, but a truck came down the drive. A real truck, battered flatbed, cream over rust, and climbing down out of it was an old man. Canvas coat, white beard stiff from the cold. Face like a walnut burl. He stopped when he saw the station wagon. He took his wool cap off. He held it in both hands. Miss Halloran, I don't know if you remember me. Hollis Bergman. I run the lumber yard out on the county road. Knew your daddy, since we were both too young to know better. He paused. Heard at the feed store this morning that Marlene put you out. Heard she gave you this workshop like it was a punishment. He looked past her, through the open door, at the firelit shapes of all that finished work. His jaw worked under the white beard. Lord, she has got no idea what she did. Does she? No, sir, I don't think she does. Hollis came up the steps. He nodded to Opal, who nodded back like they had known each other 100 years, which Della later learned was almost true. He stopped in the doorway. He looked down the length of the long room. Then he said one word. Silas. Just his friend's name, spoken into the smell of cedar, like a prayer, like a hand on a shoulder. And in that moment, standing in the workshop doorway, with her grandmother sitting behind her, and an old friend of her father's standing in front of her, and the dog asleep at her feet, Della Halloran began to understand something. She understood that the world had been wrong about her father. She understood that the world had been wrong about her. But she did not yet understand the deepest thing. Because Opal had gotten up from the stove. Opal had walked over to the corkboard on the wall. Opal was standing very still in front of one of the thank you notes. In front of a small photograph pinned above it. A photograph of a dark-haired woman, maybe 28 years old, standing in front of the workshop, with a piece of paper in her hand, laughing. Opal's fingers had gone up to touch the edge of that photograph. Opal's shoulders had begun to shake. Della, come here. Della came. She stood beside her grandmother. She looked at the photograph. She had never seen it before. Look at what she is holding. Look at the paper in her hand. Della looked. It was a drawing. A pencil drawing on a piece of graph paper. She could see it clearly. It was a design for an inlay pattern. Vines, curling around a rose. Della's eyes moved, slow, from the drawing in the photograph, to the cedar blanket chest on the workshop floor. The one with the climbing rose carved into the lid. The pattern was the same. Exactly the same. Your mother drew every pattern your father ever carved. Every one, Della. For 20 years. She drew them and he cut them. That was how they worked. That was who they were together. Opal's hand pressed against the photograph. And your mother could not read a sentence to save her life. She saw the letters swim, just like you do. She left school in the 8th grade. She never got a diploma. The whole town called her slow her whole life. And she was one of the finest designers of decorative inlay this state ever produced. Della's mouth had gone dry. She thought with her hands, the way you think with yours, the way your father thought with his. You are not broken, Della. You are not slow. You are the 3rd generation of a family of people who read a language most of the world does not even know is a language. Della sat down. She sat down on the workshop floor, in her blanket, right in the middle of everything her father had ever built. Right underneath a photograph of a laughing mother she had never gotten to know, as anything more than a face in a wool sock. And she understood that she was not alone, that she had never been alone, that there had been, all along, a whole line of quiet, careful, brilliant women standing behind her. And her father had known. He had known. And he had spent his whole life waiting for the right moment to show her. He had run out of moments, but he had not run out in time. He had left her the workshop. He had left her the proof. Della Halloran sat on the floor of her father's workshop. The dog was asleep by her foot. Her grandmother was beside her. An old friend of her father's was standing in the doorway, with his cap in his hands. And outside, the November sky was starting to break into a hard, clean, silver blue. The kind of sky that comes only in Wisconsin, only in winter, only on a morning when something is about to change. Hollis moved her out of the workshop before nightfall. He would not hear a word against it. He said a girl was not going to sleep on a plank floor in November, while he had a warm room above his lumber yard office standing empty. He said the room had belonged to his own boy, before his own boy grew up and moved to Denver. He said the bed was made. He said the wood stove worked. He said the discussion was over. Della did not fight him. She was too tired. She was too full. She was carrying too many new things inside her ribs. She packed the duffel bag she had already packed once. She wrapped her mother's quilt around her shoulders. She let Juno climb up on the truck bench between her and Hollis. And she rode into town in the last blue light of the day. The room above the yard office was small. Twin bed, iron frame, a dresser with 3 working drawers and one that stuck, a wood stove in the corner, a hook on the back of the door for a coat, a window that looked out over the stacks of drying lumber and the frozen dirt road beyond. Hollis set her duffel bag down. He stood in the doorway. He looked at his own boots a minute. Your daddy sat with me the winter my wife was dying. Every evening. Built her a chair she could sleep sitting up in, when her lungs got too bad for her to lie flat. Never said but 10 words. Didn't need to. He cleared his throat. So don't you thank me, and don't you ever try to pay me. That account was settled a long time before you were born. He shut the door. Della sat down on the bed. For the first time in a week she was inside a building that belonged to a person who wanted her there. She did not sleep right away. She lay in the dark, with Juno stretched along her legs, and she looked at the ceiling. And she said, out loud to no one, 3 words she had been afraid to say for a long time. I am still here. Then she slept, and she slept like a person who had finally been let inside from the cold. I came at 7 in the morning. I brought coffee. I brought biscuits from Vera. I brought a notebook with a leather cover, because I had a feeling we were going to need to write things down. I found Della already at the workshop. Fire going in the stove. Apron on. The sleeves of one of her father's flannel shirts rolled up to her elbows, because her own shirts were too thin for the cold. She had the walnut table pulled out into the middle of the room. She was standing over the last unfinished chair. The one her father had not gotten to. You slept. Yes, ma'am. Don't ma'am me. I am your grandmother. It is opal or nothing. Yes. Good. Now show me what you are doing. She showed me the plan on the workbench. She showed me where the last 4 spindles needed to be set into the back rail. She showed me the mortises her father had already cut. Perfect. Every one. I can do this. Well, of course you can. I have never finished a piece before. You have. You just have not been told the word for it. Every drawing in that sketchbook you carry, every one of those was a finished piece. You just did not have anywhere to put it. She looked at me. She had not shown me the sketchbook yet. She had not shown anyone the sketchbook. Ever. How did you know? Sweetheart, your mother had a sketchbook. Your father had a sketchbook. It would be a very small miracle if you did not. She did not answer. She just went back to the chair. But I saw the corner of her mouth move, and I saw her hand steady on the spindle, and I understood that I had said something right, which at 72 I do not always trust myself to do. Now here is what I want you to picture, because this next part matters. Della worked on that chair for 3 hours. She did not eat the biscuit I put next to her elbow. She did not drink the coffee. She just fit those 4 spindles, one at a time, each one seated with a small, soft knock of the wooden mallet, each one checked with the square, each one glued and clamped. And when the last spindle went home, she stood the chair up on the swept floor. She put her hand on the top rail. She rocked it side to side, just a little, to see if it would wobble. It did not wobble. She turned the chair around. She sat down in it. She closed her eyes. She sat there a long time. I did not say a word. When she opened her eyes, she said, very quietly, "He would have wanted this delivered. Then we deliver it." Hollis drove. We wrapped the whole table in moving blankets. We wrapped the 6 chairs. We tied it all down in the flatbed with rope. Juno rode between Della and me on the bench seat, and we drove out past the edge of town, to a small blue house with a wide porch and a chimney that was smoking. A young couple came out. He was maybe 25. She was maybe 24. She had a baby on her hip. A boy, round cheeks, wisps of hair sticking up. They watched us climb down from the truck. They watched Hollis and Della carry the table up onto the porch. The young wife put both hands over her mouth. We unwrapped the table in their front room. We stood it up on their scarred oak floor. We stepped back. The wife walked over to it. Slow. She put both palms flat on the top, right on the wild edge, where the bark line still showed dark against the pale wood. "That is the tree, honey. That is our tree." Her husband had to sit down. He sat down right on the floor. His grandfather, he told us later, had planted that walnut the year he came home from the service, had watched it for 60 years, had loved that tree the way some men love a dog. And when the summer storm brought it down, the same summer his grandfather died, the family could not bring themselves to feed it into the wood stove. It sat in the yard 6 months. Silas had hauled it away in October. He had promised them something. He showed me the plan. Before he passed, we did not think we would ever see it. We figured it died with him. Della ran her hand along the live edge. She said, without meaning to say it out loud, "My father does not leave things half done." She said it in the present tense. She heard herself. She did not correct it. The wife went into the kitchen. She came back with an envelope. She pressed it into Della's hands. She folded Della's fingers over it. "He would have wanted you to have it. We heard what happened. We heard what she did to you." She squeezed Della's hand. "Your father sat up 2 nights with our boy when he had the croup so bad we were scared. And the clinic was 40 miles. And we had no gas money. He just showed up on our porch. He had a jar of steam salve and a book of stories, and he did not leave until the fever broke. People do not know the half of what that man did in this county. But we know, and we do not forget. And we do not forget his girl either." Della could not speak. Della nodded. Della walked out to the truck. She sat in the cab and she stared straight ahead, and she did not open her hand around the envelope until we were 3 miles down the county road. She opened it slow. She counted the bills. She counted them again. "Opal, there is $1,000 in here." "I know there is. I have never held $1,000. "I know you have not. What do I do with it?" "You do not carry it around in your coat pocket like a fool. That is what you do with it. You put it in the bank. And Vera Prentice is going to help you." Vera was waiting. She had a corner booth in the diner already set aside. She had 2 coffees on the table. She had a small metal file box. And she had her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and a look on her face like a woman who had been waiting for a very long time to be useful in a particular way. She stood up when we walked in. She took Della's face in both her hands. "You have your father's hands. I saw them the first time you walked in here with him when you were 4. I said to myself, that little girl is going to be somebody." Della's eyes filled. Vera let her go. Vera sat her down in the booth. "Now, we are going to keep this book straight, you and me. I will read you the names. I will write what you tell me. You are going to tell me what each piece is, and what it is worth. You know that part. I will do the letters. Between the 2 of us, there is a whole person. Now drink your coffee before it gets cold." Della drank her coffee. She did not cry. She just drank her coffee. And she let 2 old women love her. and it was the first time in 6 years that she had let anybody love her at all. Now, I want to be honest with you. I did not just show up that first morning with coffee and turnovers. I did not just start writing things down in a leather notebook. I did something more than that. I taught her to read the workshop, not to read a book. Not yet. That would come. But to read the room she was standing in. Because in 40 years of teaching, most of them in a small elementary school in Rhinelander, I had learned one thing about children whose letters would not hold still. They can read. They just cannot read what the world hands them. They can read a face. They can read a room. They can read a piece of wood. And if you show them gently that what they are doing is also reading, a door opens inside them. A door that had been painted shut. A door they did not know was even there. So I stood next to my granddaughter at the workbench. And I said things like this. Look at this joint. Read it to me. I can't read it, Opal. Yes, you can. What is the wood doing where the two pieces meet? They are locked together. How? Little wedges, cut into fingers, alternating. That is called a dovetail. You just read a paragraph, sweetheart, in your father's own language. Silence. Then, quiet. So quiet I almost missed it. Oh, just that. Do you know what a whole life turns on? Turns on that one small word. In that one small voice. I have taught a lot of children. I have heard that word a lot of times. And every single time, it is the sound of a door coming open inside somebody who was told all their life they were shut. Letters swim, but wood grain does not. A dovetail is a dovetail. A mortise is a mortise. Her father had known that. Her mother had known that. And now Della knew it too. Word got around. It gets around fast in a town of 1,100 people. By the second week, a farmer came down the slope in his pickup. He was 70 years old, and his hands were the color of oak bark. He had a wooden chair in the back of the truck. Wrapped in an old horse blanket, he stood in the workshop doorway with his cap in both hands. Miss Halloran, my wife has sat in this chair since the day we married. I have never known her to sit in another. The leg let go last Sunday. 3 shops in town told me it was firewood. He waited. I was wondering if you might. He could not finish the sentence. Della took the chair from him. She set it on the bench. She turned it upside down. She looked at the joint. She looked at the grain. She looked at the way the leg had failed. Come back Thursday, sir. It will be waiting for you. The old farmer tried to pay her up front. She said what her father had always said. Wait and see if you like it first. The old man looked at her a long moment. His eyes went soft. He nodded once. He walked out to his truck. He sat in it a minute before he started the engine. I could see him from the workshop window. He had his forehead against the steering wheel. He was crying. I did not tell Della. Some things belong to the person who is doing them and not to the audience. But I thought, this is how a town gets its heart back. 1 chair leg at a time. By the 3rd week, the workshop had 4 chairs waiting. And a hutch that needed a door rehung. And a lady from the Lutheran church wanted a cradle for her granddaughter. And would Della please have it done by April? And please take a deposit. The order book was filling up again. Della hired Corbin, which surprised me more than anything. He came down to the workshop on a Saturday. His mother had not sent him. He had walked, for miles, in the cold. He stood in the open doorway, half hoping to be sent off. Della was gluing up a drawer front. She did not look up. Corbin, take that board on the bench. Mark it 32 inches. Cut it square. He blinked. I do not know how. Then I will show you. That was the whole conversation. He was there every Saturday after that. Then every afternoon after school. He had a small talent, it turned out, and a great willingness to be there. And I watched him, over those weeks, become a different boy. Straighter in the shoulders. Slower to look at his boots. He never talked about his mother. Della never asked. Some silences are a kindness. There is a peace in a small workshop in the deep of winter that I do not know how to describe to you. The stove ticks. The plane whispers. The mallet knocks. Every so often, the old dog exhales in his sleep. Outside, the snow is coming down, quiet as flour. And inside, 3 or 4 people are doing the small, unhurried work of making something that did not exist an hour ago. That was the workshop for those first weeks. And then one morning we came down the slope, and peace was over. There was a new hasp on the door. Steel. Heavy. Bright. Fresh screws driven straight into the old cedar boards. And swinging from the hasp was a padlock the size of a man's fist. Taped to the door was a paper. Della stood in front of it. She tried to read it. The words swam. She got the word estate, and she got the word property, and she got the phrase do not remove, and the rest slid out from under her. Her own workshop. Locked against her, with a paper she could not read. Her hand went up to her mouth. She stood there in the cold. For a second I saw her go small. The way she used to go small when she was 10. Then Juno pressed against her leg. And she came back. "Read it," she said. I read it. Twice. It said the contents of the workshop were part of the estate of Silas Halloran, and were not to be removed or sold pending further legal action. It had a letterhead from a law firm in Milwaukee. Not the firm the will had been read at. Not by a mile. "Marlene," Della said. Flat. "Marlene." "Yes." I drove Della to the diner. Vera called the real lawyer. The tired one from above the hardware store. He listened for a long minute. He was quiet for a long minute after that. And then he said, plain as day, that the will left no room for doubt. The workshop and every stick of furniture in it belonged to Della free and outright. And no paper taped to a door was going to change that. He said he would send his own letter that afternoon. He said he would send a man with a bolt cutter by tomorrow. "You leave it to me, sweetheart. Don't you so much as raise your voice to her." Della hung up the phone. She sat down at the counter. Vera put a plate of eggs in front of her that she had not ordered. Della ate them. She ate them the way a person eats who does not know when the next meal is coming, even though the next meal was going to come, because she was in a diner run by a woman who was not going to let that girl go hungry ever again. The bolt cutter came the next day. The letter went to Marlene. The lock came off. And the workshop was Della's again by lunchtime. A small, clean victory. Except, 2 afternoons later, Corbin was waiting for Della by the workshop door. When she came down the slope, he was not wearing his coat. He was hugging his own arms against the cold. And he had been crying. His face was blotchy. His nose was running. "Corbin, where is your coat?" "I have to tell you something." "Put my coat on." She took her coat off. She put it around his shoulders. She sat him down on the stump by the workshop door. She sat down next to him. "Tell me." He tried. He could not. He started twice. "I am not supposed to be here." "I know. Tell me anyway." "Mom is losing the house." Silence. "What?" "She is drowning, Della. She has been drowning for a year, and I did not know. Nobody knew. She just found out at the funeral." "Found out what?" He wiped his nose again. "Silas took a second mortgage on the house. A long time ago, before she ever married him. She did not know. She never saw the paperwork. And there is a whole stack of medical bills in a shoebox in his closet." He stopped. He looked at his own boots. "From when your mother was sick. There were bills. There were a lot of bills. He was paying on them still. He was paying on them the day he died." Della did not say anything. The wind moved through the pines up the slope. "How much?" "Almost 40,000. Between the mortgage and the bills. She has to have it in 6 weeks, or the bank takes the house." 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And she was going to sell the shop. She had a hauler lined up. He was going to clear it out on Monday. She was going to sell everything for pocket change. Because she thought it was junk. Because she has always thought it was junk. He looked up at Della. His eyes were red. "Silas taught me to make a box when I was 11. I have it under my bed. It is the first thing I ever finished in my life." He never told her about it. He said a man was allowed one place that was just his. Corbin's voice went thin. He was more of a dad to me in 4 years than my real dad was ever going to be. And now she is about to sell off everything he ever built for a hauler's pocket change. And I cannot stop her. And you are the only one who can. Della looked at me. I looked at her. I need to think. She got up. She walked into the workshop. She sat down on the high stool. She sat there a long time. Then Juno started barking. Old dog. Cracked bark. He was standing at the foot of the loft ladder. Looking up. Not moving. He had done this once before. The first night. When Della was still living in the workshop. He had barked at the loft. She had climbed up with the lantern. She had smelled the kerosene and the dry dust of old timber. She had climbed back down. She had told herself, in daylight, no flame, tomorrow. She had never gone back up, because the days had gotten too full, because she had, if she was honest, been a little bit afraid of what else might be up there. Juno barked again. He turned his gray head to look at her. He scratched at the bottom rung. All right, old man. All right. She stood up. She looked at me. Are you coming? I am too old for that ladder, sweetheart. I will hold the light. She climbed. I held the lantern up. The morning light was already coming in, through the tall loft window. She did not need the lantern for the seeing, but she needed it, I think, for the feeling. She got to the top. She stood up in the loft, and she went very still. Opal, come up here. I can't, honey. Then come to the bottom. I need you to hear this. I went to the bottom of the ladder. I looked up. I could see the shape of my granddaughter against the loft window. She was standing very still. Her hands hung at her sides. There is more. Opal, there is a whole other room up here. I heard the sound of her pulling a dust sheet. I heard her breath catch. I heard her pull another. And another. Opal, I am here. There is a bed up here. He built me a bed, with a headboard of joined panels. There is a chest of drawers. There is a writing desk. There is a bookshelf. There is a reading chair. Opal, there is a whole house of furniture up here. And every single piece has a tag on it. And every tag says the same thing. Silence. What does it say, sweetheart? Her voice came down again, not much louder than a whisper. For Della, from Dad. I sat down. Right there, at the bottom of the ladder, in the sawdust. I put my hand over my mouth, because I knew what this was. He had spent 4 years in the hours after everyone else in that house was asleep, building the whole first apartment of the daughter he was pretty sure was going to inherit a fight. He had been getting her ready. He had known. Some part of him had known that Marlene was going to be a problem, and he had gotten Della ready, piece by piece, in secret. In the locked room she had thought was locked against her, but was actually locked against everyone else, because he did not want the surprise ruined before its time. The surprise had come at the worst possible time. The surprise had come at exactly the right possible time. I sat in the sawdust and I cried. Not loudly, just steady. The way a person cries who has been carrying something for a long time and finally has permission to put it down. Della came back down the ladder eventually. She was carrying something. It was a cedar box, small, carved with the same climbing rose I had seen on the blanket chest downstairs. The same rose my daughter had drawn on graph paper 28 years ago. Della set the box on the workbench. She lifted the lid. Inside the box was an envelope, her name on the front, in her father's careful print. She sat down on the stool. She opened the envelope with hands that were, finally, shaking. She took out a letter. The letter was written in pencil, in big, plain, block capital letters. The kind of letters a person uses when they want to make sure their daughter, whose eyes do not always cooperate, can read what they have to say without anyone's help. She read it out loud. She had to. Sweetheart, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way into this room at last. I am sorry I kept you out of it. I wanted all of this to be a surprise for the day you got your own place. But I ran out of days before you got it. You were never slow, Della. You think with your hands. Same as me. Same as your mother. The world is just too loud to notice the quiet girls who build things. Everything in this shop you already know how to do. I taught you before you could read. It is all still in your hands. Trust them. Della's voice broke on the word hands. She kept reading. There is one more thing I left you. It is the most important, and it is not for them to find. Lift the bottom of the cedar box. The panel comes up if you press the back left corner. She set the letter down. She reached in with her thumb. She pressed the back left corner. The panel lifted with a small, dry click, and in the hidden bottom of the cedar box lay a flat bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a length of leather bootlace. Della lifted it out. She worked the knot loose. The first thing inside was a folded document. Heavy paper. A county seal pressed into one corner. Most of the print swam when she tried at it, but clipped to the front was a hand-drawn map. And a map Della could read fine. There was the workshop. There was a line drawn around it. Around the workshop and around the long strip of ground running down from it to the road. And inside that line, lettered in her father's block capitals, so his daughter could get them with no help from anyone, were 4 words. This is yours, Della. A note was folded against it. Sweetheart, I split this piece off from the rest and put it in your name at the county office. It was recorded 8 years ago. The workshop and the strip of land down to the road is yours and has been yours since you were 8 years old. It is not part of anything anybody else can sell. If a day comes when somebody tries to tell you different, you take this paper to a lawyer. And you stand your ground. Della read it 3 times. Then she went back to the bundle. Under the deed was a thick envelope, soft at the edges from handling. She opened it. It was stuffed with United States savings bonds. Dozens of them. Bought a few at a time over 16 years. The oldest one dated the year she was born. Her father had been setting money aside for her since the day she was born, a little at a time, his whole life, and never said one word. And at the bottom of the bundle, wrapped in its own square of cloth, was a board of oak, about the length of her arm, carved into it, deep, clean, sanded smooth, painted in by hand, in a color the exact green of a June leaf, were the words, Halloran and daughter. Her father had carved a sign. For the 2 of them. Della ran her thumb into the deep, clean grooves. She stayed on that stool a long time. I stood at the bottom of the ladder. I watched my granddaughter hold her father's sign across her lap. I watched Juno get slowly to his feet and cross the workshop floor and press his gray head against her knee. And I knew Marlene was still up in that house on the hill. I knew there was a hauler somewhere with a torn contract. I knew there was a developer somewhere with a checkbook, because Corbin had said the buyer was paying way over. And a buyer does not pay way over unless he needs a particular piece of ground. And there was only one particular piece of ground on that property that mattered. And it now belonged and had belonged for 8 years to my 16-year-old granddaughter. I knew what was coming, and I knew she was going to stand her ground. Della folded the letter. She folded the deed. She wrapped it all back up in the oilcloth. She tied the leather lace. She climbed down the ladder with the bundle in one arm and the carved sign in the other. She set the sign on the workbench. Then she said quietly to no one in particular, "He knew." "He did, sweetheart." "Then I do not want to keep him waiting. Opal, call the lawyer. Tell him to bring the deed to the yard tomorrow morning. Tell him to bring a witness. Tell him Marlene is going to be there. Tell him the developer is going to be there. Tell him everybody is going to be there." "And what are you going to do, sweetheart?" "I am going to stand my ground." The wind rose outside. The tin roof ticked in the cold. And somewhere up on the hill, in a warm house that was not going to stay warm for very much longer, a woman named Marlene Halloran finished her 3rd cup of coffee of the afternoon. She did not know it yet, but her fight was already over. The morning came the way certain mornings come in Wisconsin in November. Very cold, very still, a sky the color of a scrubbed pot, no wind at all, and a light on the frozen yard that made every blade of dead grass stand up sharp and separate. We heard the first car at 8:15. It was the lawyer, tired man, from above the hardware store. He climbed out of his little brown sedan in a coat that had seen 20 winters. He had a briefcase under his arm. He had the recorded deed inside it. He had a witness with him. A woman from the county clerk's office. She had come along because she had pulled the filing herself. She said quietly that she did not usually come out on things like this, but that she had known Silas, and that she had wanted to. Vera came at 8:30. She was not supposed to close the diner on a weekday. She had closed it anyway. She had put a hand-lettered sign in the window that said back at noon. Family matter. Hollis came at 8:40. He did not say anything when he got out of the truck. He just walked up to Della, put his big rough hand on the top of her head like she was 6 years old, and left it there for one long second. Then he walked over and stood next to me. You raise a girl right, Opal. I did not raise this one, Hollis. You did too. I lost 6 years of her. 6 years is not the whole thing. I could not answer that. At 9 o'clock, the trucks started coming. Not one, not two, trucks. An old red pickup, a station wagon, a farm truck with a straw bale still in the back, a Ford Bronco with a bumper sticker that said Millbrook Feed and Grain, a small delivery van with the diner's phone number painted on the side, one after another. Down the drive, Della stood very still on the workshop step. She watched them come. She had not asked for them. I had not called them. Vera had. Vera had called them the night before, because that is what you do in a small town when a girl is about to face down a stepmother and a developer and a hauler with a torn contract. You do not let her face it alone. You do not even ask if she wants company. You just show up. The old farmer was there, the one whose wife's chair Della had mended. He had brought his wife. She was walking with a cane. The young couple with the walnut table was there. She had the baby on her hip. The Lutheran pastor was there, in his black overcoat, not making a fuss, just standing. The woman from the hardware store was there, the postmaster, the librarian, two of Silas's oldest fishing buddies, a quiet man in a mechanic's jacket who had never spoken more than 4 words in Vera's diner in his life. He was standing with his hands in his pockets. He nodded once at Della. She nodded back. By 9:15 there were maybe 40 people in that yard. They did not crowd her. They just stood, in a loose ring, along the fence line, on the far side of the drive, on the slope, around the burn barrel, in little groups of 2 and 3. They stood. They breathed white clouds into the November air. They waited. Della looked at me. Her eyes were very bright. Opal, I know, sweetheart. I did not know there were this many. There are more. There are more than you know. There will always be more than you know. At 9:20, the white pickup came down the drive. Clean, new, a magnetic sign on the door for a development company out of Green Bay, and out of it climbed the developer. Tall, good coat, salt in his hair, a briefcase in one hand, and a smile already loaded onto his face. He did not see the crowd at first. He was looking at the workshop. He was doing math in his head. Then he turned. Then he saw them. His smile did a small, uncertain thing at the corner. Then it recovered, because men like this recover fast. Behind him, a battered hauling rig pulled in and stopped. The hauler got out, heavy-set, clipboard. He took one look at the crowd. He took one look at Della on the workshop step. He said, out loud to nobody, well, hell. At 9:22, Marlene came down from the house. She was walking. She was not wearing a coat. She was wearing a cardigan and jeans, and her hair had not been combed, which was unusual, because Marlene's hair had always been combed. In 4 years I had never seen that woman with a hair out of place. Not once. She was thinner than I remembered. She was walking slow. Corbin was beside her. He had one hand hovering near her elbow, not quite touching, ready to catch her if she went down. She stopped at the edge of the crowd. She looked at all of them. The color went out of her face. Because she had not expected them. Because she had thought, I later understood, that this was going to be a quiet transaction. Hauler comes, clears the shed, developer signs, money changes hands, house gets saved, and that would be that. And nobody would have to look at anybody in the eye about any of it. Except the whole town was standing in the yard. The developer walked up to Della. He put his hand out. You must be Miss Halloran. She did not take his hand. She did not move. He let the hand hang there a second. Then he lowered it. Very smoothly. I understand there is some confusion about the parcel this morning. I have the paperwork right here from your stepmother. Everything is in order. I just need us all to... Sir, said the tired lawyer. The developer turned. There is a confusion, but it is not on our end. He opened the briefcase. He took out the deed. He held it up. Not high, not dramatic, just held it up. This parcel, the workshop and the strip of ground down to the road, was deeded to Della Halloran 8 years ago. It was recorded at the county. My colleague from the clerk's office is standing right there. She pulled the filing yesterday. It is not part of the seller's estate. It has never been part of the seller's estate. And your purchase agreement is, I am sorry to say, on ground that is not for sale. The developer stood very still. He looked at the deed. He looked at the woman from the clerk's office. He looked at Marlene. You said, I did not know. I did not know that. You signed a... I did not know. Her voice cracked on the second time she said it. Marlene sat down, right there, on the cold edge of the workshop step. Slow. Her legs simply quit under her. Corbin dropped down beside her, and put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, and you could see the whole plan she had been holding up in her head come apart in her hands, right in front of 40 people. The developer stood there a moment. Then he did what men like him do. He turned. He turned to Della. He gave her the smile. He put it back on his face. And he became, in one clean motion, a different person than the person he had been talking to Marlene. Miss Halloran, you know what? Actually, this is a cleaner deal for me. I do not need the whole property. I only ever needed that 1 acre with the road frontage. So how about this? How about I just deal with you direct? Cash. By Friday. I can have a check in your hand for... He named a number. I will not repeat it here, because the number is not the point of the story. But it was a big number. It was a number with more zeros in it than my granddaughter had ever been offered for anything in her life. It was a number that would buy her a house bigger than the one Marlene was about to lose. It was a number that would put her through school. It was a number that could, in one signature, buy back 16 years of being called slow. You would have to be a very foolish young woman to sit on a dirt lot, with a wooden shed on it, when I am standing right here handing you that. The yard went very quiet. I could hear the tin of the workshop roof ticking in the cold. I could hear Juno's breath, slow and even, from where he lay curled by the door. I could hear Marlene on the step, crying without any sound at all. Della looked at the developer. She looked at him for a long moment. For one honest second, I want you to know, she thought about it. I could see her thinking about it. Because she was 16, and she had been cold, and she had been hungry, and a person does not forget what $11 feels like. A person does not forget being on a porch at nightfall with a duffel bag and a deaf dog. A person carries that in her body forever. And a check like that, from a man like that, meant she would never be on a porch like that again. I could see her weighing it. Honestly, then she looked past the developer's shoulder at the workshop. She looked at the wide double doors. She looked at the tools hanging in their painted outlines. She looked at the tall loft window catching the morning light. And leaning against the door frame, right beside her, was a board of oak. Halloran and daughter. She had brought it down from the loft the night before. She had not put it up yet. She had said she was waiting for the right day. Della looked at the sign. The second passed. The second passed, and it did not leave a mark on her. I am not selling my father's land. You go on home. The developer stared at her. Sweetheart, sweetheart, listen. You are 16 years old. You do not know what you are turning down. I understand you fine, sir. You are throwing away. I understand you fine. She was still not raising her voice, which somehow made it worse. The developer looked at the tired lawyer, looking for backup. The lawyer took his reading glasses off. He folded them very slowly. He put them in his coat pocket. She said, "No, sir. I would take that answer if I were you." The developer looked at Hollis. Hollis was just standing there, arms folded, beard stiff in the cold. His face did nothing at all. The developer looked at Vera. Vera lifted an eyebrow. That was all she did. But that was enough. The developer's smile broke. Just for a second. You could see the whole shape of the man behind it. And then the smile came back. And he said something short and cold about waste. And then he turned around. And he walked back to his white pickup. And he got in. And he slammed the door harder than a grown man should slam a door. He drove up the slope. He drove away. The hauler watched him go. Then the hauler took his contract out of his coat pocket and he tore it in half and he dropped the pieces in the frozen mud, and he got in his rig and he followed the developer up the drive. And then it was quiet in the yard. Very quiet. 40 people. Breathing. And a woman crying on a workshop step. Della walked across the yard. She walked over to the workshop step. She stopped in front of Marlene. Marlene looked up. The two of them had never looked at each other like this. Not in 4 years. Because Marlene had always been looking past Della. And Della had always been looking at the floor. And now here they were. 16 and 41. Stepmother and stepdaughter. In the cold. With the whole town watching. Marlene's face was wet. She did not try to hide it. That was the strange thing. She was just crying. Openly. Like a person who had run entirely out of the strength it takes to pretend. I know what I did to you. I do know. I know you do. I was scared. And I was cruel. And I told myself you would land fine. Because you took everything so quiet. That is not an excuse. I know it isn't. Della did not answer. Marlene took a breath. She looked at the workshop. She looked at the long row of finished work she could see. Through the open doors. I never hated you. Whatever else isn't true. I want you to know that much is. I hated that he loved the shed more than he ever loved being in the house with me. And I could not fight it. And I never once understood it. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She took it away. I understand it now. God help me. I understand the whole of it now, that it is too late to ever tell him so. She looked at Della. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect anything from you. I am going to lose the house. That is my problem. Not yours. I just wanted to say it. In front of these people. So they know I said it. So you know I said it. The whole yard was silent. Corbin was crying next to his mother. Della stood there. She looked down at Marlene. I saw her think. I saw her think all the way through it. Della crouched down. She got down. Slow. In her flannel shirt in the cold. Until she was looking up at Marlene instead of down at her. Just the way her father had once crouched down in front of her. On a winter night in this same workshop. So he could look up at his little girl on a high stool. She did not touch Marlene. She just looked at her. How much is the mortgage? Marlene blinked. What? How much? A little under 40,000. Between the mortgage and the medical bills. Della, why? Della looked over at me. I looked over at Vera. Vera nodded. Just once. Della looked back at Marlene. You can keep the house. Marlene went still. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. He would have wanted somebody warm in it through the winter. He took the debt to help people. So I will pay off what he borrowed. The mortgage. The bills. All of it. The house is yours. Free of it. You do not owe me. You do not owe me anything. I put you out. I put you out in the cold. I know. I know you know. I am not doing it for you. Della looked past Marlene. Della looked at the workshop. At the long room full of her father's work. At the sign leaning against the door frame. I am doing it because it is what he would do, and I would rather be his daughter than be even with you." Nobody spoke. Vera had her hand pressed to her chest. Hollis was looking hard at the treeline. The old farmer's wife was crying into a folded handkerchief. Marlene put her face in her hands. She stayed that way a long time. When she took her hands away, she said very quietly, "Your mother would have raised a girl exactly like you." Della did not answer that. Della could not answer that. Della stood up. She turned around. She walked over to me. She put her arms around my neck. She was 16 years old, and she had not had a grandmother's arms in 6 years, and she stood there in the workshop yard, and she held on to me. Hard. And I held her back. Harder. And that was when it stopped being a fight in a yard, and started being something else. Vera crossed the yard. Vera put her hand on my shoulder, and her hand on Della's shoulder. Hollis walked over. He set his big hand on top of Vera's. Corbin got up from the step. He walked slow across the yard. He stopped a few feet away, waiting. Della saw him. She let go of me. She put her hand out. He walked into it. She pulled him into the circle. And Marlene stood up, alone, 10 feet away, on the workshop step. And she watched. And I watched her watch. And I watched her understand, in a way I do not think she had ever understood before, exactly what she had thrown away by the way she had lived. She did not walk over. She had the grace, at least, to not walk over. She just stood. She wiped her face on her sleeve. She said, loud enough for us to hear, "Thank you, Della." Then she turned and walked back up the slope. Corbin looked at his mother. He looked at his sister. He looked at his mother again. "Go with her," Della said quietly. "She is going to need somebody in that house tonight. Come back tomorrow. There is work here for you." He nodded. He went. Once the crowd began to break up, Hollis walked over to the workshop step. He picked up the oak sign. "Now, where do you want it, girl?" Della pointed. "Right above the wide double doors, where every soul coming down that drive would see it." Hollis got a ladder from his truck. He got a drill. He climbed up. Della climbed up beside him. They drove the screws. When they climbed back down and stood in the yard, looking up at what they had just done, the sun broke through the gray for 1 full minute. The oak grain caught the light. Halloran and daughter. Della wiped her face with the back of her hand. She picked up her tools. She went back into the workshop to work. I want to tell you the rest fast, because a story like this could go on for years. And in fact this one did. But I know you have your own dinner to make. I know you have your own grandchildren to think about. The tired lawyer and the man from the county worked the paperwork on the mortgage that same week. The bond Silas had bought a little at a time over 16 years covered the debt with a small amount left over. Marlene kept the house. She had to sell the truck to make the property taxes. She did. She got a job at the pharmacy in town. Behind the counter. She was on her feet 9 hours a day. She lost more weight. And then, slowly, over the winter, she started to look like a woman, who was carrying something instead of a woman, who was hiding from it. Corbin came down to the workshop every afternoon after school. He got better at the work. He got a lot better. By spring, he was cutting his own dovetails. Rough, but cutting them. He kept his box under his bed for a long time. Then, one evening, he brought it down to the workshop and set it on the bench. "I want it out here, where the other work is." Della put it on the shelf above the stove. It stayed there. It is there now. The dealer from the city came in the second week of spring, in a long box truck, with blankets and straps. He walked the length of the workshop slowly. He did not say much for a while. He stopped at the secretary desk. He put his hand on it. He said very quietly that he had known Silas's work, that he had bought a chest of his at an estate sale years back, that he had never been able to find out who made it. All this time, it was one man in one shed in a town nobody drives through. He turned to Della. "I will take the desk, and the cedar chest with the rose, and the corner cupboard, and I will pay you a price you have not imagined." And anything you build yourself going forward, I will look at. He wrote her a check that Vera had to read out loud twice before Della believed it. Della used part of that check to buy a small house at the edge of town. Sagging porch. Good bones. Cheap because nobody else wanted the work. She spent her evenings on it for a month. And once it was tight against the weather, Hollis and Corbin and I loaded up the truck. Piece by piece. We carried down the loft furniture. The bed with the joined panel headboard. The tall chest of drawers. The writing table. The bookshelf. The reading chair. Every piece her father had built. In the hours after everyone else in that house was asleep. For the day his quiet daughter would have a home to put them in. That night, she spread her mother's quilt across the bed her father had made her. She lay down. She looked up at the ceiling. She said, out loud, to no one, I am home. Then she slept. And she slept the way a person sleeps who has finally been let inside. In the second month, a boy came down the slope. 12 years old, maybe 13, in trouble at school. The kind of boy teachers had already given up on. He hung at the edge of the workshop doorway. He said nothing. He watched. He came back the next day. He watched again. On the third day, Della handed him a piece of scrap and a pencil. She told him to draw the line of the grain. I can't. I am not good at stuff like this. I am not smart. Della crouched down. She got low, until she was looking up at him. My father used to tell me a thing is not worthless just because the wrong person is holding it. You are holding this scrap wrong, because nobody has ever shown you how to hold it. That is all. That is the only thing that has ever been wrong with you. Now look at the grain. You see which way it wants to run. The boy looked. Yeah, I think I do. Then you can read the only language that matters in this room. I was at the workbench that morning. I was sorting lumber with Hollis. And when I heard my granddaughter say those words to that boy, I had to put down what I was holding. Because those were the words I had said to her, in her father's workshop, on a cold morning in November. And she had learned them by heart. Without knowing she had learned them, and she had passed them on. That is how it goes. That is how it always goes. You say one true sentence to one hurting person, and you have no idea. That sentence walks out of your mouth and it walks into their life and it makes a home there. And one day, years later, in a room you are not even standing in, they say that same sentence to somebody else. By summer, there were 5 children coming down after school. 2 boys and 3 girls. One of the girls could barely read. She was 13. Her teachers had marked her down as a lost cause. Della sat her down at the bench and handed her a spoke shave, and inside a week, that girl was smiling for the first time anybody in Millbrook could remember. I began to come every afternoon. I brought books with big print, books about wood, books about drawing, books that used pictures to teach words. We called it, half-jokingly at first, the school. Then we stopped calling it half-jokingly. Della hung a second sign inside the doors. Halloran and Daughter. Workshop and Hand School. No charge. Marlene came down the slope for the first time in April. She stood at the top of the drive along, while before she came down. Like she was not sure of her welcome. Della did not go up to make it easy on her. She did not make it hard either. Marlene came down. She stopped a few feet inside the wide doors. She was carrying a cardboard box. I brought you these. Inside were photographs. Dozens. My daughter as a young woman. Silas as a young man. And some of Della, tiny in the bath in a swing, in a Christmas dress she must have hated. I never had any right to these. I should have given them to you a long time ago. There is a quilt in there too. Your mother made it. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I was jealous. That he had loved a whole life before me. And I took it out on the girl that life left behind. That was wrong. It was the wrongest thing I ever did. Della wiped her hands on her apron. She looked in the box. Thank you. She meant it. Marlene nodded fast. Her eyes were wet. She turned to go. At the door she stopped. She looked up at the oak sign above the doorway. He always called it that. even when there was nothing out here but him. I used to think he was being foolish. He was just being patient. She walked back up the slope. She did not run. She did not hurry. Some peace does not need to be loud. Some peace is just two women in the same town, on the same hill, no longer needing to hurt each other. That was the peace we had. That was, in the end, the peace we made. And it was enough. The young couple with the walnut table had their baby. A little boy. Round cheeks. Wisps of hair. He needed a cradle. Della finished her father's cradle. She shaped the second rocker with the spoke shave, slow, taking her time, because some things you do not rush. She sanded it smooth as reverse stone. She rubbed the oil in by hand. She set it on the floor and gave it the smallest push. And it rocked. Slow. Even. She drove it out to the young couple's house. She set it in their front room. She got it rocking. My father started this. He did not get to finish it. I did. There is no charge. There was never going to be a charge. He helped half this county and never sent a bill. Somebody has got to keep that going. So when your boy is grown and somebody you know needs a hand, you remember where this cradle came from. That's the only payment there is. The young wife started crying. You are just like him. Everybody in this town says the same thing. You are just like him. Della did not trust herself to answer that. She set the cradle rocking one more time. She let herself out. I am 72 years old this winter. I have lived long enough to bury my daughter, and to bury a good man I loved, as a son. I have lived long enough to be told, by a woman I never much liked, that I could not see my only grandchild. And I have lived long enough to have that same grandchild throw her arms around my neck in a workshop yard on a cold morning in November. I want to tell you what I have learned, in case you need it, in case somebody you love needs it. I have learned that a person who cannot read the letters on a page can still read every wood grain in a room, every face in a crowd, every silence in a hard marriage. And that reading is real reading. And a person who does that kind of reading is not slow. They are not behind. They are just quiet. And quiet, in the right family, is another word for strong. I have learned that the world is very bad at seeing quiet people. And that this is the world's loss, not the quiet persons. I have learned that a small town on a good day will remember what a good man did for it. Even 30 years later. Even when the good man himself is dead. Especially then. I have learned that a stepmother can be wrong for a very long time, and still, at the very end, sit down on a cold step and say so out loud in front of the whole town. And that the saying so matters. It does not fix everything. But it matters. I have learned that a girl of 16 can carry more than the world thinks she can. And that she should not have to. But that when she does, we should stand in the yard around her. All of us. Every one of us. In the cold. Breathing our white breath. Not saying anything. Just there. And I have learned, most of all, that the word worthless is a lie. The word worthless is what people say about things they never learned how to love. The shed was not worthless. The dog was not worthless. The father was not worthless. The girl was not worthless. The stepmother was not worthless either, in the end, though it took her the longest to learn it. None of us are worthless. We are only sometimes unloved. And love, thank God, is a thing we can start doing at any age, in any November, in any cold yard, in any workshop, with any hand we hold out. Della is 22 now. The workshop is full every afternoon. There are 11 children in the hand school this term. 6 girls. 5 boys. One of them is the boy whose grandfather planted the walnut tree. His cheeks are not so round anymore. He is 7. He can already square a board. Corbin is teaching him. Corbin is 21 years old. He goes to the community college 3 nights a week for early childhood education. He is going to be, I believe, one of the finest teachers this state has ever produced. He learned it in a shed. From his sister, who was thrown out of her own house at 16. Vera still keeps the books. Hollis is 81, and he still comes most mornings. He sorts the lumber. He tells the children which boards are worth the trouble. Juno is buried under the apple tree at the edge of the yard. Della carved his headstone herself. It just says Juno. He heard what mattered. I sit by the stove. I read to them in the last hour of the day. Big books, picture books, books their teachers said were too easy for them, and then, in the same breath, said they were not smart enough to read. I tell them the story you have just heard. I tell them their own story sometimes, in the same voice, to let them know it is being told. And every so often, in the middle of a reading, I look up, over the top of my glasses, and I see my granddaughter at the bench in the back, in her father's leather apron, with a spoke shave in her hand, and I see her look up, and catch my eye, and smile, and go back to her work, and I think, this is what a life is for. This is exactly what a life is for.